Hey everybody, I'm Amelia.
I'm Tom.
We're coming to you from Gem City in Ohio. That would be Dayton, in case you don't know the nickname. But all right, and we are in the second of 3 weeks, in chapter 5 of Matthew, the first part of the Sermon on the Mount. Some years we get like 6 weeks in the Sermon on the Mount, so we can cover most of it. But this year, I guess Epiphany is shorter than normal, so we only have 3 weeks with
Right.
that great teaching, which Tom will tell us then this um, installment number 2. It follows on the heels of last week with the beatitudes. All right.
So this is another part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel, but on a stand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine among people so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, not a jot, not a tittle will pass away from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
All right, thank you. This story seems to have a couple of sections. Just tell us briefly what's the structure of this story.
Well, the first part is these words of encouragement. You know, you're the salt of the earth, the light of the world. The second part is the affirmation of the law and of its validity and importance. And so, encouragement and words about the law.
Okay, and who is Jesus addressing here? In other words, when Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth, you are the light of the world," who's the you?
Well, first of all, it's in the immediate context of the story, it's the disciples and the crowd around them on the mountain. But of course, this is addressed in the performance of the gospel. It's addressed to Matthew's listeners. So it's a combination, and it's a multi-layered thing of you, but it's also addressed, to you.
Right? To anybody to whom the story is being told, right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
So it's direct address.
Okay. Great. And then you mentioned a moment ago about words of encouragement. And also that I guess I had mentioned that this follows the Beatitudes. Is there some connection between the Beatitudes that Jesus, starts off his sermon with and these words of encouragement to the people and all of us who are listening?
Well, I think so. It needs to be, filled out or made more explicit, I think. The Beatitudes are words of blessing. And they are addressed to people who didn't think of themselves necessarily as being blessed. So Jesus identifies these ways that people who are listening to him and who are part of his community were blessed. In this case, these words, you're the light, you're the salt of the earth, you're the light of the world, are words of encouragement for people who were downtrodden, who were oppressed. In Jesus' time, the people of Israel were oppressed by the Romans, by the Roman Empire. They were effectively told that they didn't amount to anything, and that they were, mere peasants who had no impact at all. And in significant ways, that was the case, but not with Jesus. Jesus is saying, to them, have confidence, be aggressive about doing what is right and good. And that will be a sign of the blessings of the kingdom of God, as if you push it. And so, don't be discouraged or let down because of your righteousness.
That's interesting. I'm reading a book now on, it's called America's Jails, and just finished a whole chapter on dignity. Really very philosophical look at what that concept means. But when you mentioned, Jesus talking about their value, that really reminded me of this concept of dignity. So he is helping them to see that they are inherently valuable, no matter what their social status is, if they're downtrodden, oppressed by the Romans, subject peoples, poor, whatever, they are of value, and he is really, lifting that up for them as a source of encouragement and empowerment, I think, also.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's
dignity, giving them dignity, power, encouragement.
Right.
Yeah, a spirit of affirmation. This, yes.
Yep. Okay, so now the second part of the story. What's going on there? What's all this business about the law? Speaking
of right. On the one hand, it appears that there were those who thought that Jesus' words were were antinomian. They were opposed to the law, and so he is correcting that perception. And if anything, he is saying in the second part of this that the righteousness needs to exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees. And in the next section, in the words about adultery, divorce, loving your enemy, and so on, he does that. He extends and is affirming of an even more rigorous interpretation of the law than was the characteristic of the scribes and the Pharisees. So he does that in his teaching. But
what does he mean? This whole, you said jot and tittle. Every jot, I think that's what you said. Jot and tittle.
I did. I like those words.
Yeah, those. Yeah, well, I've heard them. I mean, let's see. I'm looking at the NRSV, and it says not one letter, not one stroke of a letter.
The jot and tittle is probably from the King James or
King James. Yeah. Okay. So they're just an older way of, I don't know, describing those like technical words for parts of.
Yeah, of a manuscript, right?
Yeah,
a jot was a dot or something, and a tittle was a little fragment. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, we. Okay. Now, so Jesus is affirming the law in this passage, right? Very strongly, very strongly. So in the letters of Paul, it seems like Paul is a lot stronger on grace and is often, he certainly prioritizes grace over law. What was the case with, rabbinic Judaism at the time? in the first century? Were they always super strong about the law, or were some in that tradition that kind of eventually, had a division with Christianity when Christianity became Christianity?
Well, that was much later,
Yeah, that was later.
And there were groups within the Jesus movement that were strongly affirming of the transcendence of the law. So I was just looking through, and in Romans 14, Paul engages in discussion with people in the Roman church, in the Roman community, who were asserting that they could eat meat sacrificed to idols. And there were those who were opposed to that and who were vegetarians, who did not eat meat sacrificed to idols. And there were divisions within the community that Paul was responding to. So this is a sign that this affirmation of the law was something that was continued in the life of the Jesus movement from the 30s, in the time when Jesus was teaching, until the 80s when Matthew's gospel was being written and then proclaimed. So this was a long-standing controversy within the Jesus movement and between the Jesus movement and rabbinic Jews. So there were Christian Jews, followers, I'd say Jesus Jews, and rabbinic, and that conflict continued, often over issues that had to do with the Gentiles. And so that was the case with this controversy reflected in Romans about the eating of meat sacrificed to idols. And what Paul recommends is, don't do anything that will offend your brother and your sister. So his recommendation is effectively, abstain from eating meat. You don't have to, and it becomes a big problem for your brothers and your sisters. So don't do it.
Pragmatic, I guess, wasn't he?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but the observance of the law was an ongoing controversy, and is an ongoing controversy now.
Yeah.
In terms of how the law is being interpreted in relation to, for example, homosexuality, right, and the full inclusion of persons who are LGBTQ folk in the church now.
Yeah, I said Paul was, maybe more pragmatic. I think it wasn't that so much as that he had a higher, more transcendent value with regard to people, which I think had to do with love. And so sometimes that was more important than any given particular law, I guess.
Right, and an advocacy for the full inclusion of people who differed on matters of legal interpretation, but that they could get along, and that they could be mutually respectful of their positions in relation to the law.
Mm-hmm. It is kind of interesting, though. Jesus is saying he's not advocating any change at all, not any change, no doubt. Right. But I do think, and later on in the continuing teachings in this, what we call a sermon, he does seem to say, it has been said, but I say to you.
Right. But what he says is more rigorous in terms of legal rulings than what was the ruling in the tradition. So he was tough on divorce and on right, love your enemies and so on. Yep.
All right. So what do we make of this very last statement of Jesus's, where he says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." What's that? How do we understand that?
Well, Jesus was always advocating full observance of the law. And he would also, but he was also steadily doing things that challenged it. So
he was breaking Sabbath law right and left, wasn't he?
Yeah, he broke Sabbath law all the time, and did so aggressively. He did that in relation to relationships with Gentiles. So there is clearly ambiguity within the teaching of Jesus, within the Gospels, and in the relationship between the Gospels and the letters of Paul. So this tension and controversy didn't go away, hasn't gone away. It's an ongoing issue in relation to issues of justice and peace now.
What's the overall impact of this story?
Well, it is on the one hand an affirmation. It's encouragement to pursue righteousness, to do that which is right, that which is good, and that one of the goals of the kingdom of heaven is full expression of justice. So the purpose of the law was the encouragement of justice. So we just had a quotation from Micah. So what does the Lord require? That you love mercy and that you keep the commandments.
You do justice. It's real
you
clear.
Do justice, right.
Walk humbly with your Lord.
Yeah. So I think the purpose of this and the overall impact of it is encouragement to do justice and to walk humbly with your God.
You have this written commentary on our website that you wrote, gosh, back in 2010, I think. Anyway, I love this statement you made at the end of this, that Jesus is steadily emphasizing the power of righteousness to transform the world. This righteousness comes from a full-bodied assent to God's will and purpose for the world. I thought that was a good statement, Tom. So I'll have to end it there.
That sounds good to me.
That certainly relates to issues of peace and justice that we, always are thinking about with regard to these stories. So,
right.
All right, everybody have a great week. And even though, we'll be in the Sermon on the Mount for one more week, but I hope you'll read, you might want to, go through the whole sermon, 3 chapters, 5, 6, and 7 in the Gospel of Matthew, to have a sense of this grand teaching, collection of teachings that we have from Jesus to his disciples and to the crowd.
Right.
All right.
So power to you. Yeah.
All ye salt of the earth, the light of the world.